of all, welcome. And as we commence our meeting of March 16th, I'd like to start with our pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, first of all, we don't have a quorum here tonight. We're not going to be making any decisions formally, so just to let everyone know why we're, at least some of the folks aren't here that we expected. I received a call from Mary Pat Wickstrom. She's on our group. She is at her son's basketball tournament, and frankly, that's probably where she needs to be, cheering him on. Barbara Hall is still in Florida. I think Ken Redden is still in Florida. So therefore, we were down to 6. We have 3, and where the remainder is, well, hopefully they'll find their way to the meeting. So that being said, I'd like to hold to our agenda. First of all, to start with our citizens' input, and if there are any citizens here that would like to make comments, are there? Yes, go right to the mic.
Yes, good evening.
Want to state your name, please?
Yes, Michael Baril,
Yep.
143 West Street here in Uxbridge.
And first of all, before you get started, I
Yes.
want to limit it to 5 minutes,
Yep,
and please stick to the 5 minutes.
absolutely.
Thank you
Yep,
very much.
Yep. The reason why I'm here tonight is I actually watched your last meeting that you had back on March 2nd. And one of the things that I'd like to say, or like to talk about, which actually you guys actually discussed with Bruce Desolitz and Carrie Robertson, there was some discussion about selectmen recall and this and that, and some other matters that came up about how the town manager functions, how the board of selectmen function, et cetera. Basically, just to say it is, regarding Carrie Robertson making the statement and the thing about selectmen recalls, I was actually the one that had spoken at the Board of Selectmen meeting several months ago and asked that she resign. And I had talked to the other board members and expressed a complaint against her previously. Yeah.
First of all, let me just say this.
Yes.
We're not here to take testimony on any individuals.
Oh, I understand, yeah, I know.
Okay, so please refrain
Okay.
from using any individuals. If you want to speak to policy
Oh,
and
okay.
procedures in general, feel free to do that. But I'm not going to allow testimony to
Right.
come in here on any public official.
Yeah,
I want to be clear on that.
okay,
So if it comes up once more, I'm going to ask you to step away from the podium.
okay.
Thank you.
All right, well, actually,
Continue.
I won't talk about that at all, I'll say that. Regarding a town manager matter, which I have some documents here from Worcester Superior Court, the town is actually named as a defendant in a lawsuit, and I would actually like to just briefly show something I want to explain.
There again, I'm not going to deal with anything
I'm
that
just
has...
I'm just showing you town records, am I not
I
allowed
don't
to show you that?
No, I don't want to get involved in any discussion about any litigation, any personalities. We have, under Mass General Law,
Yes.
opportunities to go into executive sessions when it has anything to do with any individual, and there's appropriate places for that. Specifics, they belong in specific situations. This isn't the place for that. And please, if your intent is...
Can I just read one paragraph?
One paragraph and it references a name, that's it. The conversation's over.
It's in reference to the charter.
Right.
You know,
I haven't heard anything in reference to the charter yet.
We're here for the charter.
Right, I understand that, right, and it has to do with issues with town managers and the charter, because you were discussing, in the last meeting, you were discussing things about, should we have a town manager, should we not have a town manager, what have town managers done in the past, how have things been effective, how have they not been effective?
It's our position to gather input, okay? Not to chastise any individual. I, as chairman, am not gonna allow
Yeah.
that, and I'm not gonna let us pursue that. That's the
Yeah.
last time I'm gonna say it. If there's anything in general you wanna say about the town manager section of the charter, please feel free to do it. Other than that, refrain from the conversation or leave the podium.
Can I read this paragraph from a court document, and that's it?
Is this a pending case?
Yes.
I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. There's nothing that we can do about that. If it's a pending case,
Yeah.
it belongs where it belongs, in the court. It doesn't belong here. We're not going to litigate from this position any case that has anything to do with any town employee. Please.
All right, I'll just say one more thing. What I was gonna read to you was basically the lawsuit has been filed because of an issue with the town manager failing for this
Mr. Burrell,
July 8,
please.
2009.
Please. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. This is not the place for your conversation regarding that, and I want to...
So where would be the appropriate place, sir?
In the courts where it belongs, and that's where you brought it. Keep it there. Whatever attorneys you have doing whatever they need to do, please do it there. This is not the place to do it. If there's any member of the group that thinks differently, please speak up. I am not going to tolerate it, period. That's it. Thanks for stopping by.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you.
I'm glad that was productive.
Thank you. Is there anybody else from the community that would like to speak? John? Okay. Thank you very much.
Just for ease for the town manager, do we want to just make room up here at the table?
Sure, and that's what I'd like to do. Yes.
Making him stand?
Mike?
Wherever you want.
Wherever you're most comfortable.
Doesn't matter to me.
Mike, thank you very much. For the public, this part of our agenda is, as our second meeting indicated, we had asked our town manager, Mike Szlosek, along with the finance director, treasurer collector Dave Genero, to be here. Dave is out ill today, as I understand it, Mike?
Yeah, he'll be out today and tomorrow.
Okay. So he was unable to make it. Tracy had commitments this evening, I guess.
And she also left, I don't know if she made them, she was feeling ill and left early.
Yeah. So, Mike, it's your opportunity to chat with us, and Mike, you're in a unique situation here, in that you're the third town manager that we've had. And judging from some of the conversations that we've observed regarding the meetings that have been taking place, there's a lot of concerns about the charter relative to the town manager and this form of government that we're operating under. Mike, can you talk to us a little bit about, looking at this charter, what is it that sticks out in that charter that says to you, this is the document that we as a community should embrace, or this is the document that we as a community ought to think about making some changes to?
I actually think it's a good charter. I think it was well done. But I think it needs to be, people need to be educated and adhere to some of the policies that are in it. It very clearly expresses that the town manager is the administrative officer of the town and does the day-to-day business, and the Board of Selectmen is a policy-making board. And that's not always easy for boards to do. The people who run for boards of selectmen tend to be very community-minded, very interested people. It's hard for them to keep their hands off the day-to-day business. And, I mean, that's not a bad thing. That it's not malicious in any way, but it's tough for people to learn that we're here to make policy. I don't know if you can fix it through changing the charter. You can't specify that in the charter. I guess it takes living it for a while. You've been living it for 10 years. I don't know that it's, people have yet understood the role of this sort of divided government where the Board of Selectmen is not a day-to-day board, because that's the way it used to be. Years ago, it used to be a small board, and probably you had an executive secretary, and the Board of Selectmen made all the decisions. And as the town grows out of that into a professional management system, it's tough for people to let go. But I don't think it's a problem with the charter.
Mike, when you look at your section of the charter, which is Article 4, 3 or 4 pages, in your opinion, would you consider this a very strong charter?
It is a strong manager charter, without question. Stronger than any that I've worked with, and stronger than most that I know of. There are few in the state in which the town manager is the chief executive officer as well as chief administrative officer, but those are very few.
We speak of strong, that meaning the appointment process.
Appointment process, yes. It's strong, the appointment process, the ability, for example, this is to, I'm missing a page here.
I think it starts on page 10.
Page 10, I'm not sorry. To reorganize, consolidate, and abolish agencies. That's very strong language, but it's useful when you are in a difficult financial position such as we are. And I haven't done it on a grand scale, but I certainly have done it on a limited scale as far as consolidating departments and operations, combining staff. It's tough when you don't have that ability. I come from a community, my last job had a lot of elected officials, and frankly, if we had that system, we'd be in a lot worse shape because we had an elected collector and elected treasurer, both with strong ties in the community. There's no way you're going to combine that office. Here we have a single finance director doing the treasurer and collector's job for a lot less money. You build little castles all over the place, and it's very difficult to assail them if they're elected officials. So having a town manager form of government is a little more nimble, I think, as far as reacting to financial crises.
Interesting.
Having said that, Mike, in your composition, boards of selectmen past, have you worked for 3-member boards versus 5-member boards?
I've never worked for a 3-member board before. There aren't a lot left in the state. The only one I know of for certain is Wilbraham has one. I know that. I don't know if there's any around here.
Any pros or cons in your opinion? Or?
Well, I think 3-member boards make it tough if one person's absent. You've only got a dialogue between 2 people, and it's very difficult unless there's a unanimous opinion. You're not going to get anything resolved. But beyond that, 3-member boards under the current open meeting law are a minefield. 2 members meet in the supermarket or make a phone call, you've got an open meeting violation. And 2 members can meet in the supermarket and talk about the ball game, and that's not an open meeting violation. But inevitably, it strays towards town affairs. So I think that's an issue with the 3-member board.
When you talked about the, how would you put it, coordination, merger, and the ability to define agencies within the charter, the director of finance, the treasurer, collector, you believe that that's an efficient way to function as far as government goes?
It's efficient to be able to reallocate personnel and resources without dealing with the walls that have inevitably develop when you have elected departments and strict areas of control. Without major changes and going to the voters, it's almost impossible to do that. Under this sort of a system where department heads are appointed, yeah, you can reallocate resources more easily.
We had, over the life of the charter, one board that went public, so to speak, for a charter revision, the Board of Health.
Yeah.
Independently, seeking that action, has that affected the function of government and the efficiency that you see here?
No,
within
I mean, the Board of Health only, they have one admin, and it's remained that way. That happened while I was here, early on when I was here. I had mixed feelings about it. I do have very strong feelings on what elected boards should be and what they shouldn't be. The Board of Health does make policy, although they do a lot of things that are not policy related. And I don't have a problem with policy-related boards going before the board, before the voters, because that's the only way the voters get a say in that policy. There was also a proposal to make the Board of Assessors elected. In my opinion, a bad idea, because assessors should do what assessors do without regard to policy. It's a ministerial and it's administrative function. Same with clerks and treasurers and collectors and things like that.
Do you feel that the function of the Board of Health is being effectively carried out under the current system, the way that's by elected officials?
I think it's being effectively carried out. Certainly, I haven't really seen a difference since it went from appointed to elected. I think it's been the same both ways.
Was there a transfer of responsibilities that
Not that I saw.
come out of your side of government, the full-time?
No, not really. I mean, I do tend to defer more to elected boards but I really have not, the relations have not changed since it went from
What I'm
appointed
basically
to
getting
elected.
at was, did you suffer a burden, and you probably wouldn't know this, prior to the board being an elected board, responsibilities that really weren't within the scope of your office? When I say within the scope of your office, the day-to-day business of the board.
I was asked on a couple of inspections prior to it being an elected board. I haven't been asked since, but I certainly would go if asked. I think they wanted me there for possible enforcement,
So it did lighten the load.
to some extent, to a limited extent.
Getting into that same
It
vein.
wasn't much of a load before.
Getting into that same vein, when we talked last week about the DPW commission, and the charter abolished that, basically.
Yes.
In its effectiveness for autonomy, I guess, for a separate decision-making board, and that being transferred to the Board of Selectmen now carries with it a weight that probably occupies a little more time than it should. And I say that from an efficiency standpoint. The idea here was streamline government and to take some of the burden away from elected officials when it came to the mundane day-to-day business, and I would say that it's day-to-day business, especially when you talk about rate setting and extension projects and things like that, and street acceptances that seem to be occupying a tremendous load on the Board of Selectmen.
Well, actually, street acceptances are a Board of Selectmen function. They are, the
Right.
board is in charge of public ways. I think I'm well-placed to speak about elected boards versus what I have here, because I had an elected Board of Public Works. Yeah, I have mixed feelings. There is certainly a greater burden on that, in that area, without an elected Board of Public Works, but there's also a lot more flexibility. I wasn't crazy about the elected Board of Public Works because I think it tends to be somewhat incestuous with the contractors. Everybody I know who ever ran was a contractor. So I don't know if that works particularly well. It's nice not to have to worry about plowing, although I was procurement officer, I still had to go through the process of procuring the plow operators and that sort of thing. But, the day-to-day operations, no one was calling me because the street wasn't plowed. They they did. I said, call the Board of Public Works. I have no say over that here. On the other hand, I ended up getting into long conversations, well, I guess I can use the word conversations, over things that I wanted done that here I can just tell them to do. For example, and we do it with the animal control officer here, but there was some dissension and over picking up roadkill. The Board of Public Works told me, and we're not doing it, we don't care what you say. That wouldn't happen here. If it was an issue, it would get done rather quickly and easily.
So, as somebody who has to wear both hats in this venue, as we looked at the impact of just even the last snowstorms that we had, you're fielding calls from residents, and the DPW is fielding calls, and they're coming to you. Everybody's coming to you in that regard, and then you're getting the policy-setting board also coming to you in that convergence. Did you find that problematic?
I mean, sure there's headaches, but on the other hand, it gave me the ability to control some costs this year. If you look at what we spent on plowing, given this horrendous winter, we're slightly below the 5-year average. Yeah, we took some complaints, but it's nice to go to town meeting and not be asking for $500,000. So I don't know if that would have happened with a Board of Public Works, because they tend to focus on what they're doing without regard to the bigger picture. You know, I don't think they would be concerned with getting the streets as clean as possible, and to heck with the effect on the reserves. And that's what I experienced in my last position.
You mentioned bigger picture. Do you feel that as it's configured now, do you feel that the Board of Selectmen and as water and sewer commissioners and yourself, with the control you have, do you feel that there is people are looking at the bigger picture? Or do you feel that the board now is in a more of a reactive mode rather than
No, I think the
reactive?
board is looking at, certainly at water and sewer. We know what's coming down the pike. You know, I talk to Ben about it frequently, and you know, I know, for example, in your department, you've got people coming towards retirement that we need to develop personnel and things like that. Certainly, we're aware of that. The concern, of course, is resources at this point.
Mike, you referenced a big, I'm sorry, Jim. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
You know, it's, I believe, were you here when the Board of Public Works was, there was a resident's petition, a citizen's petition to reestablish the Board of Public
No,
Works?
that predated me.
The board at that time stated that they felt that the information was too complex and involved for them to devote proper amount of time to, and that was kind of echoed by Selectman Desilets at the last meeting. Do you feel that proper attention is paid to those issues, or do you feel?
To water and sewer?
Yeah.
Well, I certainly pay attention to it, and I think the board pays a good deal of attention to it. I guess if there was a dedicated board there would probably be, you know, you decrease the scope of the duties. Obviously, you can devote more time to specific things. I think we have a good idea of what's coming up, and Ben certainly is competent and is on top of things.
I know you mentioned elected and, you know, Board of Public Works Commissioners. Have you ever worked with an appointed board that maybe would report to the Board of Selectmen, somewhere, something in between? Would this be an assistance to a town manager in the structure?
I've never worked with an appointed Board of Public Works. Geez, I don't even know if that, what section is PPW under? I guess it would have to be, I don't think there's legislation to allow that, but I suppose a advisory committee would be
I know
possible.
in last week's discussion, one of the discussions is when Peter would be better with this, is the boards that were eliminated, a lot of them, it was, you wanted to kind of funnel, it's the town manager's budget, he should be the one presenting articles. So, an appointed board, not necessarily able to present articles, but ad hoc or.
I think it's a good idea for department heads to present their articles. They know the most about what the articles are concerned with. I think it's a great idea for the department heads to present articles. And I think that should be clarified in the charter, that articles could originate, articles should, it says that, and I think it's a gray area that I've read one way and other people have read others. The charter says that the board must include articles coming from elected officials or multi-member boards.
And also petitioned articles.
And also, well, that's by state law.
Right, right.
But does that mean must and then exclude all others, or must and the rest is discretionary? You know, if someone wanted to bring something to the Board of, the Board of Selectmen as an article without a petition, would the board have the ability to say that's a good idea, we'll put it on?
They did it this
That
week.
should be clarified, yeah.
They did it this week.
I think it allows it. It says you must do this.
Right.
It doesn't say you can't do that.
Right.
And I think department heads should fall under that section, or that ability.
That's an interesting point, because Jim, you bring up something that we had a fair amount of discussion on last week, and I think Mary Pat certainly went down that route, whereby the budget is yours, Mike, pretty much, in consultation, as the charter says, with the Board of Selectmen. And the timelines.
Finance committee too.
Excuse me?
And the finance committee.
Exactly. And the timelines warrant that in the posting of what's going on, and to alert the public as to, here's what the warrant looks like. Where we found was the question of, how would you feel if you put a budget together on the current charter right now, whereby the department head doesn't have the ability to put an article on there, and goes to town meeting, contrary to your budget, or the town manager's budget, and says, I really want to fight on town meeting floor, what I think is in best interest of my department, even though it's not in reality what the town manager would like to do within the budget set forth, and approved and moved right along through the FinCom, right through whomever Board of Selectmen has discussion, whatever. How do you feel about that, Mike?
Well, I certainly have worked under that scheme before, and I'm not that crazy about it. Town meeting tends to, people don't do a lot of prep before town meeting, frankly, and it can be difficult when they don't have all the information and things are just sold on, sometimes on emotions. My last community, I had a fire chief, nice guy, but every year he put on 3 firefighters, another admin, a deputy chief, and a piece of equipment in an ambulance. Every year. And I said, you don't need that stuff. He says, yeah, but if I don't ask, I won't get. And, you know, some years he got his 1 or 2 firefighters, and he just kept building and building and building. But it wasn't really, I don't know that was done by need. He put it on because he could. I hope people wouldn't do that here, but, you know, I don't know. We are in a difficult financial situation, and if we're taking from giving to some place, we have to take from someplace else. I understand department heads are frustrated now with budgets, and I'm frustrated too. But they're seeing their picture and saying, you know, what the heck, we don't have what we need. And I'm seeing it all and saying, nobody's got what they need. It's a tough place to be. I don't like being here. But if we go to every man for himself, it's just gonna get worse.
So therefore, making the statement that you would feel okay with department heads being able to submit.
I would like them, well, not directly to, I would like them to pass it through the Board of Selectmen. In other
Okay.
words, to submit to the Board of Selectmen, and the board would have the ability to either approve it to go on, at which point the town manager would have some input, or not. But I certainly wouldn't shut them down on having the ability to bring it forward, but not without any checks, or not without any intermediate screening. It is the Board of Selectmen's warrant, and they should have the right to either put it on or not.
So in your honest opinion, Mike, because you've been here a little over a year and a half or so?
Over two.
Over two. You've seen how the warrant works, and we hear from folks around that we're not following the charter, we only follow it when it's convenient, and frankly, problems arise because of that, whether we invalidate an article or validate an article or a process that we're going through. In your opinion, and there is no enforcement of this charter, there's no enforcement provision if you don't follow it. Talk to us about that, Mike, because we've seen it every year come budget time. We hear about it all the time.
Well, first off, by enforcement in what way? I don't know if you can appoint a charter cop within it some way. I know it was put forward by someone that I have the ability to fine people $25 for violations of the charter. First, I don't want to be the charter cop. Second, the charter, like all constitutional documents, and that's what it is the constitution of the town, are subject to interpretation. And I don't want to have punitive measures for people who with different interpretations.
Ultimately, I'm not aware of any complaints that have been filed with the Attorney General's office.
Neither am I.
Or the District Attorney's office in that regard, and again, as that's enforced, it's just like an open meeting law violation. If people are willing to go forward with a complaint in that regard that would express that, then, certainly an issue. But in the 10 years, I'm not familiar with any, I don't know if you.
No, I'm not familiar with any either. And frankly, it's tough enough to get people to volunteer for elected or appointed positions without having some punitive measures dangling over their head for violation of the charter, willing or unwilling, or knowing or unknowing, rather.
You mentioned education earlier on, I think we're talking about the interaction between the Board of Selectmen and the town manager. And I think that's where last week, or 2 weeks ago, we got into conversation, which we're just doing now, about penalties. Do you have any thoughts as to how, if the charter was to stay the same, how to implement it, or how to make it work in today's world?
Well, people have to make it work. You can't fix the charter with the charter. You can't fix the problems with in implementation with the charter itself. The charter is not a bad charter. We have a wonderful constitution in this country, and people, it's worked for 200 years, but we follow it. The Soviet Union had a really wonderful constitution, too, that gave people all kinds of voting rights and all kinds of rights, but it was a piece of paper. It's not, the charter doesn't mean anything unless it's followed. People need to read it and understand their role and follow it, and then it'll be a workable charter. If it just, people say we've got a nice charter and, someday I'll read it, it's not gonna be useful.
Yes, personally, one of the things I struggle with is, it's up to the individuals whether they want to follow it or not, and there is no, apparently there's no recourse to force anybody to follow it. So sometimes, when I think about it, sometimes it's like, well, why have the document if any one person can decide not to play? and I know it's probably, I mean, it's a tough item. Somehow, I think if we're gonna stay with this, somehow we have to work on making it work. So I think the basis for it is very good. But again, if some of the players don't play, it falls apart.
Well, I have a suggestion, but there is a cost to it. I mean, we have a competent town council, and when there are questions, rather than simply arguing over, ignoring it, I mean, you can always refer questions of interpretation to our town council, who has some level of I mean, he's strictly speaking, he's hired by the Board of Selectmen, but he doesn't live in town, he's not in town, he's somewhat dispassionate. So that is always an option, and that's one I used in my former community, although there was no charter there were bylaws. When there were questions over interpretation of bylaws, and they weren't soluble, sitting around the table, we would refer them out to town council, and then live by it.
It's interesting when you make that statement, and to hitchhike on what Bill's saying, I think we've all around this table read this charter. I know I've read it several times. I don't find it too cumbersome in terms of being able to read it. It's pretty straightforward. It seems to me to be simplistic enough. But I guess, Mike, you have to work with it every day and you apply it. And coming from your vantage point, is there anything in here that's ambiguous to the extent that it doesn't clearly define what your role is, what the Board of Selectmen's is, and how that should mesh together? Because this has to pull the community forward on the merits of what it is, and then plug the people in and take it and say, okay, we're gonna put the horse in front of the charter, and we're gonna pull this charter forward because the Board of Selectmen understand it, the town manager understands it, clearly department heads understand what their role is, and together, the community's gonna win, because we all understand the roles. Seems pretty clear in here to me.
Oh, I think the charter is very good on the big things. There are certainly, there's some mechanical things that I don't think work so well in the charter that I'd like you to look at, but...
Would you be specific too? I mean,
Okay, look,
if, as long, because we really want to know specifically what is in here that is ambiguous or not working, or if you could put it in from yourself, even being a lawyer, what would you do different?
I mean, little things. I mean, for example, posting the warrant and actually the warrant process. I think it's a good idea to put a time limit on me to get the budget in, because it's got to get in and get to the finance committee.
Yep.
But I think it unnecessarily handcuffs the selectmen in essentially it says you've got to accept articles to 60 days before town meeting, and then close the warrant. You can't do a thing after that unless it's an emergency. Very few things are emergencies to get on a warrant. I think there should be more flexibility for the board as to when to open and close warrants, and the ability to reopen it if something comes up. I mean, if someone called me and said, you know, we have a street acceptance, we'd like to get it in. When do we have until? And I said, I'm sorry, the warrant closed on Friday. Well, we didn't know about it. You gotta wait till fall. It's not an emergency. In a perfect world, I'd say to the selectmen, can we, you know, reopen the warrant, insert this article, and close the warrant. We can't do that here. Did it all the time in my former community. If something came up, 60 days before town meeting is always a Friday. I have to get staff in here on Friday because that's what the charter says. I can't close it on Thursday because that's 61 days before town meeting. Town meeting's on Tuesday. 60 days is always going to be Friday. It's just the way, you know, the number of days works. Can't change that, can't vary it. And I think that some flexibility should be put in there to allow the Board of Selectmen to set a date approximately 60 days ahead of time to facilitate just the flow of business. and the ability to reopen the warrant if they need to, without it being an emergency, because emergency is a heck of a high standard.
It seems to me then, the budget process that we must go through as it pertains to the warrant and ultimately preparation for annual town meeting, particularly with the state in which they come out with governor's budget, house budget, timeline, and we try to mesh that as to what's going on from a moving target point of view, from their end,
Yeah.
not knowing where we're gonna be with cherry sheets, et cetera. Mesh it into the school committee, which they have to have their hearing, as specified in here, with their budget, in concert with yours, and then the warrant. Is that not helping you, Mike?
Well, I submitted a budget, and it went to the finance committee, but I will guarantee you that that will not be the budget you will vote on at town meeting. It's, and it can't be.
Right.
For example, we continued negotiations with our health insurance company. We had rates for Fallon of 17% and Blue Cross, increases, 17% for Blue Cross, 17% for Fallon, 8.5% for Blue Cross. We did some more negotiation, we brought in another vendor. They quoted us lower, even though we would have to negotiate to go to them. We got a response, Fallon, we'll go to 9.9%.
Good job,
Blue
Mike.
Cross, 5.9%.
Good job,
Well,
good job.
that produced another big chunk of money.
Good job.
Not a big chunk of money, but a chunk of money. It went somewhat to the municipal side, more to the school department because they have more employees.
Obviously, right.
But that changes the budget. That's not the budget I submitted. On the downside, the MMA just last Friday put an article on their website. Interview with the chairman of House Ways and Means. You know, the governor's budget, we're not sure that the local aid figures he gave you, they may go down.
Oh, nice,
So, you
nice.
know, if that comes out, another cherry sheet comes out, well, now we adjust it again. And we'll be doing that till town meeting. And frankly, there may be things that happen after town meeting. We're gonna be adjusting the budget at fall town meeting for things that happened subsequently. Happened last year. Changes were made after town meeting. That's what's nice. I mean, I don't think Uxbridge should or would want to abandon town meeting, but, you know, towns that have council forms of government, they often pass their budget on June 30th.
Ultimately, why that was put in place, and just to give you a little history on that, this town had a, how would you say, a long-term, a tradition of generating town meetings based on need. And there would be years when we'd go 3, 4 town meetings in the course of a year, probably more. And on these special town meetings, of course, you saw budgetary requests that should have been handled at annual town meetings. You found all kinds of crazy things that really gave no organization to the structure of government. And I say really gave no organization to it. There was no planability. It didn't bring all of the factors into play when we talked about the street acceptances, because we got a special town meeting coming up. You know, let's get it in on this one, so we don't have to run it by. And that was a real problem with the last, when we incorporated the charter. They couldn't make quorums. They'd sound the fire whistle here to bring enough people in to make a quorum, sitting down in the lower town hall. People don't realize that probably 75% of our town meetings occurred right in that little room. And was that really an effective way of doing government? Did we reach out to everybody to make serious decisions? And the only time people were serious about attending was when it impacted the overall community, with the dog track, with the waste disposal site down, the medical waste disposal site. Those were the big new school issues, all those kinds of big topics. So the idea with having these how would you put it, that inflexibility when it comes to generating town meeting warrant was to make sure that people knew that that's how the system works and is clear in government. It doesn't give us the flexibility that we need when we're lean, when we're tight to the bone, when we're juggling daily to try and support budgets and functions and maintain services and moving in an economy that is really quite different today than it was when we put this charter in place. People expect immediate responses. This age of communication is being immediate. We're stuck here. We're in that environment. So, that being said, is it time to revisit that? Is there another device that we can incorporate as we look at this to bring that a little more into perspective? I think you made a couple of good points there as far as, the flexibility in that warrant and the advertising and publishing. But, once again, we spend all kinds of money publishing according to the charter, and it's not the document you're gonna sit down there and when it comes to the actual meeting.
I think it's a huge waste of money to publish the document in the paper nowadays now. People don't read it there, they'll read it online if they're gonna read it. And we can publish it for nothing online.
But again,
Newspaper publication is a lot, we spend a lot of money on that.
it is an issue that's clearly outlined in the charter, that we probably, need to revisit and look at that.
I believe so too.
Mike, how do we get the state? Because it seems to me that what's really pressing is a big problem, is the state and way in which it lays out this governor's budget, the House budget, MMA gets involved. And then all of a sudden, we start finding out, they just said, well, we're gonna give you a warning here, although you're halfway into your process or reasonably into it, don't plan on this because this may happen. So how do we, locally, fix things that are outside of our domain that are really driving us crazy? And I don't know how anybody would to say it, because I've lived it too myself, from sitting here going through the budget process and watched the town manager labor over extensively putting the budget together, only to find out that every day it's a moving target.
It is, and it
And
is.
why did I have to go through this?
Well, you're not gonna solve it, and I'm not gonna solve it. And I don't know if they're gonna solve it on Beacon Hill, but that's the only place they're gonna solve it.
So what can the charter do, knowing full well that we have a situation in hand that we can't control, but yet we have to implement a local procedure that brings this into some method of getting results, an agreement on a realistic number that we can get folks to agree on?
Well, I mean, the budget that I put forward is a realistic budget, and it's our best estimate at that point in time. And you refine it over time. That's the only way to do it. The only way to start with a more accurate budget is to start later, and I don't think that's a good idea.
I was gonna ask you your opinion of a June town meeting as opposed to May. And I don't know why we settled on May, I was gonna come back to that after, but do you think that extra month would help at all? Not just with the budget, but with,
I suppose it would help with the budget. I don't think it would help with anything else. And I think it would make it very hard to get people in. As you're getting closer to the vacation season, and it is tough. Uxbridge's town meeting is unusually late. Town meeting season is starting now, and the majority are over by mid-April. So we're among the last. Now, because of the uncertainties, I know of a number of communities that have done their town meeting, picked up the budget, and then adjourned it till June to finish the budget. I don't think we need to do that. I mean, we can, the budget's gonna be pretty close to the final budget. I think we could do a good job of estimating revenues, reading the tea leaves, and if there are changes, they can be fixed at the fall town meeting. They can be adjusted. We did that last year based on changes at the very end in the Senate budget, which was the local aid package package that ultimately was approved. We got hit a little bit worse at the very end, but, we adjusted it later. And what we did is, you sequester some of the funds. It's in your budget, don't spend it, because it's going.
Would that create an additional issue with the annual town election? We usually hold the election after the town meeting, so for that reason.
And I think if you change one, you have to change the other, because I think if I remember right, the issue was you're changing the elected, you could change the elected folks prior to town meeting.
Yeah.
But you want to have consistency of those folks that were in the budget process, at least to play it out for that year. Exactly.
Was that the basis of the May, was it?
I mean, there's no statutory reason to do that. In fact, my hometown is just the opposite. The town meeting is right after the election. Meet the new guys.
You're in business, and you work a week, and you expect to get paid for that week that you work. You're not gonna spend the money until you're sure you've got a good percentage of that money sitting there. And I think when you look at assessed tax values and things like that, and as many start to generate from the community, you get a pretty good idea of what you're working with. And a lot of it was just tradition. That's once again, when we incorporated the charter, we didn't really want to change a lot of the, how would you call it, the traditional values that people held in our government and the way that it functioned. So, once
I thought I
again,
remembered that at some point, didn't we try to move the town meeting into June for a year or two because of budget number issues?
not to my knowledge. Once again, it's, as you start to look at those things, and again, attendance,
Right,
when we talk about vacations, schools getting out, things like that, June can be problematic, a
Yeah.
very busy month. But
Even May's becoming problematic.
there wasn't really a lot of discussion along that line, other than the fact that we like town meeting. Town meeting happens at a certain time. We can't always clean it up in just one town meeting, and maybe we need to think about, a process for being able to revisit some of the issues that occurred previously, which is what the philosophy was behind the second town meeting.
One thing with town meeting in here, we've had a number of meetings where, they've gone on till late. And I'm wondering, how do you feel about the charter in terms of setting a limit on the length of a segment of town meeting? And if it has to continue to an additional day, do we define that it's the next day, the next week?
I mean, you can do that. I don't think you have to, though. I mean, it's not a good thing to be inflexible on that, to say we're ending at this time with one article left because nobody shows up. You're gonna have a hell of a time, or heck of a time getting a quorum.
Well, the moderator at that point could, poll the people that are remaining there.
Oh,
you know,
certainly.
But at least it's a time, where something could be set.
Yeah.
Might be something more appropriate to ask the
Set to,
moderator, but.
Yeah, I think it should be within the discretion of the moderator.
One of the issues there,
The town has a rule, you can't do town meeting past 11 PM. So at 10:59, if we're close to the end, the moderator says, unplug the clock.
you got milking to do in the morning. You can't be out too late here.
And whatever time we finish, it's 10:59.
Just a thought he brought up, the 60 days, a good point on that. Something as simple as changing that to 2 months. Now we're on a Tuesday.
And, once again, when you start to look at those issues too, you're also dealing with speech issues and free speech issues and open government. And it takes on a real messy area, especially whereas, we want to encourage participation and we've certainly had plenty in controversial issues, and I think that's a great thing. That's how government's supposed to work. Unfortunately, the people that might have to drive home a few miles away, at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Usually the controversial issues, they move it up on the warrant, and
I just wanna introduce, when we were talking a little bit about the accountability aspects and how do we hold people accountable here for not enforcing the charter. Have you had any experience in recall in any of your former employments?
Not with, I've had experience with attempts to put recall provisions in, not recalls per se. And almost always, the attempts to put them in have been personally directed. So if you're gonna do it now as part of this process, rather than doing it somewhere down the road when we gotta put a recall provision in because of so-and-so. Do it deliberately, and I caution you, if you do it at all, make the threshold very high. I think there has to be general consensus in the community that there's a problem that needs to be solved. It can't simply be factional, I'm gonna recall you, and then, you get dueling recall petitions, and that's a mistake. But occasionally you get someone who, for whatever reason, gets into office and may have been competent and ultimately proves to not be the person you want to deal with for the remainder of the term. I mean, things happen to people. They may get ill and refuse to step down. They may, it can be difficult when you have officials in place that can't be removed, especially for long periods of time. And there's no mechanism, but it should be a very, very stringent mechanism. I can give you an example. There was, I can't recall his name, a Supreme Court justice who really became senile. And the other 8 justices had to make an agreement among themselves, because he wouldn't step down, that they would never allow him to be the deciding vote on a case. And that's where it was. And when he was appointed, he was perfectly competent, but things happen to people. So recalls should not be, they should be for clear problems, not for political issues. I think if there's a recall, it should be by a supermajority. Everyone needs to see that there's a problem. But simply, I'm going to gather 10% of the voters in town and sign a petition, and if we can get 51%, you're gone. Well, that ends up in duels back and forth. I would suggest a recall petition with a supermajority of 2/3 or something.
Have you had experience working with the town that had that provision?
No. No town I've ever worked in has had a recall provision. And this is the kind of thing that, you probably don't see. It may be in the books, but, you maybe recall someone once every 40 or 50 years under those circumstances. But you may get someone who appears to be perfectly reasonable and just for whatever reason becomes incapable. Most of the time those people become that way. They're not elected that way. And most of the time people step down when they become incompetent in some way, but it's a safety valve. In general, just a basic recall provision is asking for trouble.
conflicts we have with the charter?
I know you've mentioned that there are some, and none of them come to mind right now. Perhaps you can point some out.
Yeah, well, just one just being the DPW commission and the outline of
It's still in there.
once again, the revisions on that really didn't encompass the separation, or the true separation of the commission. That being said, as we start to look at these kinds of things, and even by incorporating a bylaw change that instituted a recall, say if people wanted to do that outside of doing it through the charter, is that possible, first of all?
What's that?
Having a recall written into the bylaws rather than into the charter?
I'd have to read that. Let me see what it says about elected officials. I never thought of doing it that way, but
I don't think there's any language in there at all, Peter, about recalls or any discussion throughout the whole charter on that. I see it.
Well, ultimately, what I'm looking at here, and just for a second, when we talk about making a recall provision as a bylaw
Right,
change,
right.
we're talking about a home rule
Right, That's difficult.
imposition. Whereas the charter took
Right.
that faction right out of,
Right.
that government control, that put that, invested that into the charter. I would think that it wouldn't be possible to do it by bylaw, but that's just, I have to ask that question.
I'd have to read the charter very carefully for that possibility. In other words, whether it would preclude doing it by bylaw. I would suspect it would. I think it probably should be in the charter.
I'm just trying to think of a way to depoliticize it. As we sat here last week, we heard basically the same thing, how do we keep it from becoming a political quagmire? If we go down that-
Recall should not be a political tit for tat. It should be an extraordinary measure for extraordinary circumstances.
And again, we know that, but like any other institutional change, it becomes politically driven. And having our hands tied with a charter modification for a recall, with that inability to flexibly change it, without going through a charter review, really makes that a problem. To try and institute something that, well, we might be a little bit on, how would you say it? Not so firm ground. And again, as you try to experiment in that venue, and I say experiment because that's ultimately what it becomes, when you try to depoliticize something like that, what would be the best approach for it? And I think that's probably.
Well, really, we're talking a 3-year term, I think, at most, for any elected official, and you're gonna, a recall process takes some time to go through that process.
I wouldn't make a recall the centerpiece of the charter review. I think it's not. It should be very hard to do and very infrequent, and ultimately, most democratic institutions can survive 3 years of someone who probably shouldn't be there.
It
It's
was
just-
an
I
issue
mean,
with the drafting of the
and-
charter, that's why.
You could look at our national government and see that that's true. And I'm not gonna tell you what I'm referring to, whether it was a current or former elected official, but, we all have people we think shouldn't have been there. But the institutions survive. I don't think a recall provision is
It's usually gonna be a year or so
Vital.
into their term before we notice something, another 6 months for the process. Now you're halfway through, and at that point, is it really worth, you know?
Good point.
I mean, California did it with Gray Davis, I don't know, Arnold was much better.
Mike, I'd like to just for one moment here refer specifically to your section of the charter, which is section 2 of Article 4. It talks about powers and duties, and there are an awful lot of them here, which creates that strong town manager form of government. But just to bring us back a little bit in history, I think the reason for the strong powers and duties was that we were in trouble 10 years ago, and we started in 1988 when we put the original study group together to study town form of government, and then ultimately,
I wasn't here, can you just give me describe what you mean by in trouble?
well,
I mean, we're financially in trouble now.
yeah, well, what the trouble was that apparently the issues that we were wrestling with, and I wasn't part of that charter group, or I wasn't part of the original study committee, but I think that they saw that we had to get things done differently. As we were growing, we were experiencing growing pains, and in order to get different results, we needed different ways of approaching things. The line was used when it came time from the study committee to go to the charter committee was, how can we reasonably expect to run a $32 million corporation with part-time folks who really don't understand how to run the government? And that's a reasonable statement. So therefore, we went forward, and the charter folks put the charter together with the assumption that we gotta do things a little different because we're growing and we need different results. Therefore, a strong charter. My question to you is, because you're one that lives this, and you're one that the community depends upon, or your position is the one they depend upon. In your experience, are these reasonable? Are they attainable? In view of the fact that you seem to have a moving target, because you're dealing with the day-to-day, putting out the fires, if you will, trying to wrap your arms around goals and objectives that hopefully the selectmen are positioning with you, in concert with you, and yet also you're getting put on you other responsibilities like chief procurement officer, which deals an awful lot of your time with the school situation.
By the way, that's one point for the charter that I think you should change. It says to be responsible for the purchase and disposal of all supplies. That should be to serve as chief procurement officer, and I'll tell you why.
And that's exactly what I put right here, procurement officer.
Because under MGLs, you must appoint a chief procurement officer if you want to do an RFP. It's got to be issued by a chief procurement officer. So that should be in as that title, not to be responsible for that purpose. Just an aside.
Right.
But on the broader question, I mean, there are a lot of responsibilities in here, and it is a broadly drafted town manager document. Meeting all the goals I'd like to meet, we are resource constrained. It would be nice to have a little bit more staff. I have a very good assistant, but I guess in other days there were a lot more people in that office. And I think we could get more done if we had more people, but it's just not practical right now. And, you know, you could do more at the fire department, you could do more at the police department, you could do more at DPW if you had more people. That's the reality of what it is now.
So the intent of the charter was sincere, and the expectations that they expected were real. Perhaps maybe what they didn't realize back then was we were gonna fall on the economic times we fell on right now. Staffing would be problematic, and
Staffing is problematic, but I think having a strong position gives some flexibility. You can react to things in a way that a more separated, more, a government with a lot of different power centers can, because they tend to fight for their own turf. And I certainly saw that with a system that has a ton of elected officials and a ton of elected boards. They all start fighting for turf when resources become constrained. And it's very difficult to manage tough times when no one person can say, look, we're going to divide everybody's going to take their share of the cuts, instead of departments fighting against each other, elected boards fighting against each other. It took us 5 years to hire a full-time planner. We're not going to a half-time planner. We're not laying the planner off. That's what you hear when you've got an elected planning board and an elected board of assessors, and elected this and elected that, and elected clerk, and they all fight for their own little fiefdoms.
So then, that being said, Mike, has this charter helped you, or has it hindered you? Because we all know the results of the judge.
Well-
And we try to do, by putting this charter together, at least I want to make that assumption, that this was to help be the roadmap to whomever plugged into it, to be able to say, I clearly understand what my role is. I clearly understand what I can do.
Oh, I clearly understand what's here, but I'm saying as far as effectiveness, when you look at the town, and this preceded me, we've had year after year after year of contraction.
Right.
Where limited revenue growth, growth in fixed costs, where we've had to contract the operating budgets. I don't know if we would have been able to weather it without a strong position like this.
That's good to hear.
Actually make the cuts as necessary. And make them stick. I think if it was a series of elected officials, it would have all fallen apart. Because I saw it in my last position, which was a community that was frankly in a stronger financial position and had $1 million in excess levy capacity, but that's been going down and down and down because there isn't, there's no one that can say, you know, you got to take the cut here. I mean, I knew of departments that had simply people that were overstaffed, but there was nothing I could do about it because they were, I had an elected collector, an elected treasurer, both had overstaffed departments. In the situation I was at here, I would have first combined it and had a single treasurer collector with a single office staff, and it would have gone from 2 managers and I think 7 admins, probably to 1 manager and 3 or 4. That would happen here, it could never happen there.
So therefore, if this document specifies pretty well and assists you or any other manager in how to navigate forward, then it leads to the next concern, which is what the document can't do, and what people, I think, must do, is that communication component.
Yeah, you can't legislate communication in a document like this.
How do we then, because I think we need to get the tough questions out here, and we need to get the responses back from the people that are really in the field, that are fighting the fight every day. And is it a communication, the charter is a pretty good charter and everything's okay, but people don't understand it? Why don't they understand it? What is it, Mike, that you wrestle with every day as people are firing away at you with the communication component? How do we get people to understand what their respective roles are? How do we get them to buy into what the charter suggests is our way of doing business?
Well, I think it simply takes time for, and I know it's been 10 years, but it takes a long time for people to get comfortable with the system of government. And I don't have an answer to how we get people to read and understand and follow the rules in the charter. I don't have that answer for you. I think one issue we have is we don't have a lot of institutional memory here, and people don't serve long apprenticeships. And in some communities, you've got to be in 6 different boards and appointed boards and different elected boards before you can be even considered as a selectman. But it's much more fluid here. People, I think, tend to not be required to serve an apprenticeship to get to that level. And on the one hand, it brings a lot. With that sort of a system, you get fresh ideas, and that's a good thing, but you also don't get people that are seasoned in government. And I'm just thinking of my home community. You better have been on the planning board and the finance committee and everything else, or you're not gonna even be a viable candidate for Board of Selectmen. And yeah, it makes it an old boys network, which is not a good thing, but the old boys that are up there certainly know a lot about government.
So how do we do a better job on that, Mike, in terms of,
Well, I don't know that you need to do a better job. It's simply the way the community operates. It would be good if there was some way for people to learn the process as they come up. But I don't know how to, it's a culture thing here. We don't have a lot of, I don't know how to say that.
all right, well, let me
We have,
make-
if you look
yeah.
up at Millbury, for example, I think Mr. Plant on there.
Yeah, he's been about 30 years
He's
up
been there for 30 years.
Yeah, he's the dean.
We don't have that here. People come on, come off, and get in and out of government, and there aren't so many long-term players. I don't know if that's good or bad. It's just different, but it makes it harder for people to understand their roles when they're coming in and don't have those long tenures.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think that's critical. And longevity and institutional memory is always, in my opinion, something that we should bring through succession. However, if we're on our 3rd town manager, and the intent of this charter wasn't to have a new town manager, in my opinion, every 2 years, every 3 years, and I think,
That in there.
well, I didn't read that either, but my concern is, if there is the chief executive officers and the chief administrative officer, is this charter assisting in getting those two to synchronize, or is it in conflict, or is there anything in here that doesn't allow or enable that to happen, that we could, in fact, get to work better? Because, to be honest, it's not working. And I don't want to mince the words, it's not working. Somebody's got to convince me it's not working.
What
I know
dynamic you say
from
is
my
not working?
perspective.
What's not working?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. What's not working is, and I'm going from a position where I've been as a selectman and served in numerous other committees in the community, working at how is this charter, from this point, the last 10 years, which is what the intent was, to get professional town management in, and we were gonna turn this corner, and we spent a lot of money over the last 10 years as a community for professional management and additional staffing as a result of that. And the results just aren't here yet. Is it because of the charter or
But when you say results, what are you gauging that on?
results?
When you talk about results, have we now suffered a loss of efficiency in the way government operates? Have we suffered a loss of voter input where the community can't express their real needs? Has there been that?
Well, I guess the results are, take a look around the community and see what's happening with our capital infrastructure, see what's happening with retention of employees, see what's happening with where we are relative to succession management, things that we need to do in order to say, hey, listen, you know what, we're better off today. I guess the question is, Ronald Reagan said it when he ran, if you think we're better off today than where we were 4 years ago, then I'm not your man.
Well,
I mean, is it or isn't it?
I think a lot of the things that you're referring to are more a function of the economy and of today, rather
We go.
than this document.
And that's what
It's-
we're trying to flesh out, Jimmy.
I think what you're looking, for this document to do and what it has the potential to do, in a better economy, it probably would. But it hasn't in this economy because he doesn't have the resources to implement a lot of the things in here.
And that's where I'm going, because if there is a problem that the charter can't control and the town manager can't control or get the results that we'd all like to get through this charter, then where do we go? We know the charter's a pretty good charter according to what you just said, Mike.
Well, I think you also need to understand that the manager's always gonna report to the Board of Selectmen. The manager is gonna have, no matter what the charter says, the manager's going to have the level of authority that the board allows him to have, or her to have. Because ultimately, the board has the power to hire and fire. And if they don't like the way the manager operates, they're not gonna retain that manager. I've had an personal experience with a middling level for authority, town administrator role description through varying boards. And some boards were extremely empowering. Mike, we want you to make these appointments, or the Board of Selectmen appointments, we're delegating all this stuff to you. Under this charter, we hire professional staff, just do it. Tell us who you're hiring. And then later boards came in and pulled that back in. You work with that, but no matter what the charter says, you've got to deal with whatever level of authority the board will allow you to have, because ultimately, they can hire and fire you. And I don't know how to go around that. Some communities have done that, and I don't think it's been effective. Webster, for example, the Board of Selectmen doesn't hire the town manager there, or town administrator, whatever he is. They have an independent board that's not hired by the town manager.
There's a key, right there.
Well, the problem is I think it's appointed by the moderator. The moderator, a number of years back, appointed a board. Board of Selectmen said, well, we got this guy for an interim, we want him. And the committee said, we don't like him, we're not even gonna interview him. And they interviewed, found somebody else, and said, we got our guy, Board of Selectmen, hire him. He said, no, we're not gonna hire him. He said, well, according to the charter, we can hire him. We're hiring you. No, I was gonna work for someone that, Board of Selectmen that didn't want him. Just, you've gotta work for the board, and you've gotta have a board that wants you. And there's really no way around that. The board really has to hire and fire the manager, and ultimately, the manager has to be accountable to the board.
So if you,
I can't think of a way around it.
so if you could make the decision, because the charter initially said, the first town manager was hired by a screening committee. I remember watching that screening committee, going through all the process. Subsequent town managers are hired by the Board of Selectmen alone. if you could produce the document that said you'll get better results, would you recommend the Board of Selectmen make those appointments, or would the screening committee make the appointments?
I think the manager's got to work for the board, and I think the board's got to hire their own person.
So the board should make the appointment?
I think so.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, forcing a manager on a board that they don't want cannot lead to good results.
Does having that relationship, have you found that that's tied your hands at all in the way that you want to manage the town, but you're not able to because of interactions with members of the board? And I don't ask for a lot of, but in general, and I ask that just because of your
Well, I
comment that,
mean, at some level, the board should be able to, heck, they're elected. People voted for them. Nobody voted for me. Well, they did. The board previously did, but I mean, the citizens didn't elect me, and I shouldn't be able to ride roughshod over the elected people in town. So, yeah, there should be some constraints on the manager from the board. That's democracy.
but have you found that it's interrupted or interfered with the way you would, your management style or your direction?
You mean getting involved in day-to-day business?
Right.
I mean, it's gonna happen. And that again is, and it's not any particular board, every board of selectmen I've ever worked for, does not make policy as often as they should and gets involved in administrative things. Because it's hard to make policy. It's hard to make, broad policies are very hard to formulate, especially with a committee, but that's what they're supposed to be doing. And a lot of times, they don't do that, and the manager ends up making policy. I'm not supposed to make policy. And boards get involved in administrative things, which, when they should be making policy, but it's easier to focus on individual items than broad concepts. And we all know that. I mean, it's easy to solve, Mrs. So-and-so's issue than to think about, okay, what are the implications? What's the problems that cause Mrs. So-and-so's issue, and how do we resolve that? And what policies can we put in to resolve those issues for everyone? That's human. That's to focus on the immediate. And I don't know how to, it's not the board here, it's the board everywhere that does that. Every board I've worked with focuses on individual administrative things because ideas don't come to them, people come to them with problems.
In the past 2 years, or 2.5 years, have you had to act on policy that was established by the board, this current board?
Act on,
Have they instituted any policies?
well, I mean, we have a book of policies. I mean, there's certainly, and they've been looked at, and as Peter said, we make the policies, we put them in the book, nobody looks at them, but we look at them.
I'm just,
I mean, they've made,
perception of policy is something that's written and is a guide to.
well, I mean, they
say
made
it,
policy on plowing streets, and that's useful to do that, rather than saying, all right, we're gonna plow this one, and we're not gonna plow this one. Give us guidelines, and that's what we like to see.
So the selectmen have identified policies that.
Yeah,
the process.
certainly on snow removal, things like that, certainly they do it, but it is a hard thing to focus on. And it's easy to focus on the narrow rather than the broad.
I just have one question, Mike. You have the responsibility of the town budget,
Yes,
which frankly includes the school budget.
Yes.
When you look at that, and we know the school has complete autonomy on their budget,
They certainly
you
do.
give them an amount, and they can do what they want with it.
I wish I could do that on the municipal side. I think it's not a bad thing to have that level of autonomy within budgets. It's very difficult to, when you can't move things around.
So is there any, and I ask this question because I don't have the answer, is there any way that somehow in your budget process, and it's a tough position because you have to deal with that segment of the budget to the tune of maybe 75%, that really it's by power of recommendation, and that's it. Because they're gonna do what they have to do, the school, with their budget, and town meeting's gonna do ultimately what it has to do. How can the charter, or can it, if budget is the big problem and the budget process is an even bigger problem, how do we, or can we, within this charter, facilitate that process of school versus town, getting it to click a little better than it has been clicking, and make it work from your end so it doesn't become adversarial and it becomes complementary?
Well, first, can I just ask you to, I hate the term school versus town.
Well, and I do too.
They are school versus municipal. They're
Right.
still a town. They're
Right.
part of the town. They're as much part of the town as anything else. I don't know what the charter can do as far as that is concerned. It happens everywhere, and I think it's not as bad here as other places. It is a big department, and they do a lot of things. They do a lot of expensive things, and they're required to do a lot of expensive things. And I certainly understand the drivers of their budget. And like any, they present a budget, and they have presented a budget, and this is what we need to do. And we need this much. This particular year, what they say we need to do is $500,000 more than I can give them. Because I've got to look at everything and say, well, we don't have enough money for anything anywhere. And if I give them that extra $500,000, well, there's no place to, it's got to come from somewhere, and there's really no place to take it here. I mean, $500,000 isn't, although it's a lot of money for the school, it's an unbelievable amount of money for any other department, or even any other group of departments. But I'm not going to blame them for asking for it. They reasonably, I've looked at the school budget. It's not an unreasonable budget. It's just we don't have enough money for it. I don't know how to facilitate that and make it easier. It's not going to be easy, and I don't think you can do it in the charter. All you could really do is incorporate the revenue sharing agreement into the charter, and then it's something we have to live on with down into the future, and we've taken all flexibility away. I don't think that's a good idea.
That would kind of.
Incorporating that in?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think that's a great idea to incorporate it into the charter and take away flexibility to, future superintendents and managers.
That would be counterproductive to the budget setting process, which gives you the budget. To say you're gonna lock it to a revenue sharing agreement or anyone else, I would hate to tie anyone's hands, who is the manager trying to put this budget together from a bottom-up or a top-down approach, however it's coming.
I mean, that's the only way I could think of to and that's the way we've done it currently with the revenue sharing agreement, to share, frankly, some of the pain of these cuts. I wouldn't want, the only way I can think of to really put the process into the charter is to put the agreement into the charter, and I don't think that's a good idea. I think it has to have some fluidity.
Good point.
Earlier, you had said that there were some items that you might want to see changed in the charter, and I think you mentioned the first one was the
Yeah, well,
timelines of the
yeah,
warrant, and we cut you
the
off, so
CPO
I just
thing,
wanted to.
Another thing came up recently, and, you know, as you live with this thing, you see, where is this initiation? 7A, initiation warrant articles. Well, citizen came forward earlier with a petition. There was no warrant open at the time. And I think he's gonna point out to me, because it says the board shall receive at any time petitions addressed to it, which requests the submission of any matter. And I know I'm gonna have that at any time pointed, but the fact is, if I accept a petition with no warrant open, the town clerk can't certify the signatures because they may not be valid signatures once the warrant opens. Plus, we've been advised that it's not a good idea from the AG's office, so I think that should be, it should say the Board of Selectmen shall receive petitions for, you should make it clear that that 10-member, or 10 citizen petitions are for open warrants. And at any time, you can bring a petition forward, but it should have 200 signatures on it, and we'll open a new town meeting.
Right, which
You
is
can do
there.
that at any time under state law.
Right.
And we have certain timelines
Yep.
to hold a town meeting. But it doesn't make sense to bring petitions forward when there's no warrant open to put them on. I'd just like clarification on that, because it did cause an issue. I mean, people do their best when they're drafting, and when I've drafted bylaws, you try and say, what could happen? What's wrong with this? What circumstance wouldn't this work in? And you never think of them all.
Good point.
And I'd be glad to go through and just give you something in writing with some suggestions for clarification.
Appreciate that.
I don't think there's nothing I saw that's really egregious. There's just things that can be ambiguous. The point I pointed out, the shall include. Well, I've read that shall include from multi-member boards to mean, and may include others at their discretion. Someone else has read that and said, that's all you can, they're the only people you can put warrant articles on, that's it.
We have a discussion at a town meeting for about 2 hours on shall.
Yeah.
I remember that one.
Ultimately, you know, when you deal with stuff like that, you know, you never know what kind of statute's gonna come out that offer new authorities, you know, there could be a million different things. So, once again, as you start to refine that language, I think that's a literal interpretation.
Well, in this case, shall, the implication, shall do this, does that mean shall do this and nothing else? That's one person's interpretation, it wasn't mine.
And again, like we look at any law that's published, you know, what is the intent? What is the intent of the law? And what was the intent of that section of the charter? And as we try to explore that area,
Well,
it's gonna be challenged, there's no question about it. But
usually though, when a judge looks at legislative intent, there's some legislative record, and I don't know that we have that from the Charter Commission to say, yeah, this is what they meant. And perhaps they never considered it.
That's interesting, because earlier tonight, when you brought up the Constitution, and it just brought me to, you know, it's the courts that go through, it's ultimately the Supreme Court that issues the interpretation of the Constitution, and
They certainly do, we don't, but, you know, we don't have a judicial branch.
Right.
And it's interesting, when you look at original intent in the Constitution, they had no open meeting laws. that was all done behind closed doors, and here we are, 120-odd years later, looking at that Constitution, saying, what do they mean by this? And there's no documents, because it was all done behind closed doors with no records.
Well, you can sit down and go through some of our tapes from 2001 and 2002 if you'd like.
Mike, this has been a really unique opportunity for us because frankly, we're the first group that's had a chance to get involved in the review of this charter. And you're the first town manager that we've been able to, obviously by virtue of timing, to get some real live, honest feedback. That wasn't available to the last two managers. Maybe unfortunately, there wasn't. But in this case, we must get it right, at least to the extent that we've taken on all the testimony we're gonna take on, right through and including all the way right to end of August from every individual that is involved in helping the community, whether it's elected officials, appointed officials, compensated officials, and,
Well, I think the last Charter Commission did a good job. Has a generally workable charter, and, you don't have to get it perfect. You have to, this is an incremental process. You'll improve the charter, and 10 years from now, somebody else will improve it again, and 20 years from now, it's a document that will evolve over time, and that's not a bad thing. Governments are human institutions, and they're fluid, and I like to think that we can improve things over time, and I think that this charter will continue to improve into the future.
now, that being said, the charter says in years ending in 0, and that was 10 years, so here it is 2, so if we go and we say ends in 0, we get 8 more years. Should we in fact think about, based on your workings, should it say 5 years from now? Is that too soon? Is 10 years too late? Is 8 years just right? In your opinion?
Well, I guess it will happen again, or it should happen again in 2020. I don't know, if you do it every 5 years, I don't know how long this process will take. Theoretically, it could then become a continuous process, and I don't think that would be useful. 5 years, I think, may be too much. I think you need to live with it for a while before you... There's always the option of a citizen-initiated petition if there are real problems with the charter. Interestingly, I know that one town in Western Mass had a charter, an appointed charter review committee operating at the exact same time as they had a charter commission, and they came back with different reports, obviously.
That's interesting.
One question I had with it, it's the duration of the term of the town manager is not really in here. There's no time frame. Do you feel there should be a minimum? Do you feel at any point the town manager should be an employee at will, or would that preclude your ability to do the job?
I think it's very difficult for a manager to be... If you want a strong town manager, I think you've got to give him some tenure.
Do you think that should be defined in the document?
Good question, Jim. Good question.
I guess, given my current circumstance, it's tough to say in any way that isn't self-serving. So I don't think I can comment on it.
Yeah, we got you in a tough position here, Mike. We're not naive. We know what's going on. The community knows what's going on, and I respect that. But I respect that. Any other questions? Mike, I know you got a long ride, and I want you to,
Third, I'm here.
I want you to hit the road because we appreciate your input. Hopefully, we'll have some more time to call upon you for some information as time goes on. You've been very cooperative, and we appreciate that. And thank you very much. You're a pro. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll call our attention to our next agenda item, which is approval of our minutes. And, Bill, we had some interesting conversation about,
Spell Jim's name right.
yeah.
Well, actually,
We don't
we can't, we don't have a quorum, right?
we can't vote
Right.
on it, so.
Oh, Mike, yeah, you're a pro, no kidding. Okay, I'm sorry about
Mr.
that.
Chair, we don't have a quorum, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, exactly. So, we'll hold our minutes till next meeting.
Any other spelling improvements, changes? Sorry, Jim, again.
Yeah. Okay, so,
Justifiable reason.
our next meeting will be April the 6th. At that point, we'll have the Finance Committee and the Town Moderator. They'll be here. I frankly, that's the only meeting. I'm hoping that I won't be here. I've got a vacation scheduled that week, and I'll ask the Vice Chair to chair that meeting for us, so. But other than that, pretty good discussion.
Yeah, that was very good.
Felt it very helpful. And Pete, I know you had brought forth, and there's been some level of discussion regarding having a set of questions that can assist us in moving forward. I think these are well-defined questions, and we ought to, I'll make sure that everybody on the group gets these questions. One thing I feel strongly about, and I hope that, I want to not limit us so much just to questions, because I think that we're all here because we've got a lot on our mind, and we've expressed that interest in the various committees that asked us to serve, that we got a lot to bring to the table. And, yeah, structure it, but,
Ultimately, again, on our charge, as we look at it, it was a review committee.
right,
We have to look at what the charter brought as an impact onto the community when it was accepted.
right.
And then whether or not it was functionally, how would you say it, efficient.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not it has met the needs of the community. And I think, the topics that I presented here were just solely mine. And I say mine, they were agenda topics that came up when we initially started the process. Processes that were probably introduced with a lot of question, and I say with a lot of question, because, some people saw them as legitimate causes on there, and I say that when we talk about recall. There was a lot of debate back then. Once again, we wanted to get a document that we knew was gonna go before the voters and get the support of the voters. And these questions that I asked were sidelines, and they were politically sidelined for a reason, because we wanted that. We wanted to be able to define this government and make it acceptable to the community. Now, as we bring this back out, were those good decisions? Did we make valid decisions at that point when we brought this into perspective? The same thing as, again, as you look at some of the questions here, the 3-member, 5-member board, those were all questions that went before the previous candidates or department heads and those that were involved in the process. And again, the effectiveness of the altered or abolished committees or commissions. Once again, when we made these changes, the devices weren't in place to modify the bylaws immediately after the charter was put into action. There was a couple of bylaw review committees, but I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure if they took the consideration of the charter impact change in its full scope. And again, we've operated in a venue of tradition for so many years, and it was loose enough, and it's been interpreted loose enough to allow that tradition to evolve into what it is today. Were those effective changes? Have we, when we did this, did we burden somebody else or another board that we shouldn't have with responsibilities that should be disseminated elsewhere? So those are the things that, when we talk about efficiency and improvements in the communication and budget, I think the town manager really put it well tonight, whereas, that scope has all fallen under that umbrella of the town manager. And the communications and the efficiency, while they may not be the greatest in the world as a institutional issue, but they certainly have a clear line that we can define. And when we go to talk to the department heads, we should be focused on how is that line of communication? Has it been an efficient line of communication? Do we have a defined chain of command if it's that, or do we have a defined role going both up and down the ladder? These are the kinds of things that we looked at when we said, we're gonna put all that authority in the town manager. He put it very, very good tonight. Like I said, I think when you're talking about independent boards and independent functions, when we had an elected town clerk, an elected assessors, all of these fractionalized boards that really were just driven by, they're driven by their statutory agenda. And I mean, that's what they're required to do. They're fulfilling their duties. And while we know that, they're still fulfilling their duties now, it's how they fulfill their duties that's being directed by the town manager, and that's defined in the charter. It's how that's streamlined. And that's really the bulk of what we were trying to look at when we put this thing together. Big picture, it really is. I mean, it's not, the little nuances of what we're looking at now. I sit back and I say, well, what's been the impact of this change? Have we seen, well, we went on for years with the same elected treasurer-collector and the same elected town clerk and the same elected board of assessors. And that gave people a comfort zone that, well, their confidence carried. Now we've got the shift in dynamics. We're not talking about having people run for an elected office to build that level of confidence in the public. We're looking at the town manager to instill that level of confidence in the public that the person he appoints is doing the job adequately. When I sit here as being part of the initial process, those are the answers that I'm looking for. That's what I want to know. Did it work? Has it worked? And if it hasn't, maybe there's something we can do to fix it. So that's really the scope of what these questions are, and they're not really questions, they're topics.
Right.
Because the questions have to come from you guys. But when we look at the topics, I think this is what's most important to me.
Well, I appreciate that. I think that it's important that we have some consistency of the expectations from you guys and what reality is today. So, and I think there's a reason for why you're on this committee and why Artie's on the committee and why Barbara Hall's on the committee. That consistency of what took place, where we're going with it, and it's important. I appreciate that institutional memory, I really do.
One thing I would like to caution about, and I just want to take an opportunity to mention this, is that having a problem or a deficiency isn't necessarily always a deficiency as we see it as members. And we really need to be as open and receptive about different ideas that come from people and try not to lead people into specific answers. I like to present examples. Sometimes people take that very leadingly. Just as a misconception that may have occurred by our earlier meeting, people think that I'm out to establish a DPW commission, and that's the perception that has fed back to me, and that's really not it at all. I mean, the idea here is to get this open conversation going on, and if I misled anybody into thinking that that's the purpose here, that's totally wrong. It was a change in the charter that we really, we struggled with, you know. Again, there was a lot of testimony on that, and it was a tough decision when we started about talking about these committees and how that unfolded. So, yeah, I want to know the nuances. And I'm trying to do this in the most unleading way, but again, unfortunately, it may have
One of the things you were saying.
taken on a different dimension, and that wasn't intended.
It's a topic for discussion, and you said you wanted to have them say, this is how it was and how it is now. Well, a lot of these people, when we keep talking institutional knowledge, they weren't in this position 10 years ago.
Right.
And that's one thing. Maybe it's a function of the times, maybe it's a function of the charter, but the institutional knowledge in this building here is gone. You know, and whether or not this document contributed to that, I don't know. You know, it could be a function of the age of the people, maybe it was normal attrition. But, you know, looking at it that way, a lot of the stuff, you're gonna remember how things were then, but the person you're having that conversation with, you're gonna have to remember where you were when you address that question to this person. This is our intent.
And
how does that play out with
as
reality?
you noticed tonight, in most cases, when I talked with Mike, it was, you know, based on your experience
Yeah.
in other communities
Well-
or in other places, because again, you know, when we start to ask department head questions like that, it raises issues that they may not necessarily want to reflect in a public forum
Yeah.
if it takes away from that public confidence. So, you know, once again, we need to try and be as generic as possible when we do ask those questions.
Well, that's an important point, because right after our first meeting, I can remember coming into the town hall, and I won't mention, but one person approached me and said, are you really gonna make my position an elected position? Where'd you get that from? Well, that's what somebody told me. I said, geez, I didn't know that discussion went to that level. So I guess that everybody looks at it through a lens of when it looks in the mirror, how does it reflect upon me in my position? And that's unfortunate, but we're only here just gathering information, ultimately making recommendations, and we have no authority nor power to make any changes other than power of recommendation. So I hate to consistently reiterate that, but I think that folks that are tuning in need to hear that. And if that's a comfort zone, let it be. So, and the hour being 9 o'clock, and I want to stay true to my promise.
So moved.
Is there a second on it? We're done. Thank you very much.
Have a good night.
Appreciate it. Have a good night, guys.